He thought he had heard it all, until Elon Musk's 5-year-old son asked a question that no one at the dinner table could answer. What Donald Trump does next will break your heart and open your eyes. The dinner had ended almost an hour ago, but Donald Trump was still seated at the long, polished table in the East Room, his dessert untouched, his glass of water quietly sweating, leaving a ring on the linen cloth. He wasn't sure why he was lingering. Maybe because the conversation had drained him, or maybe because something had happened, something small but sharp, and it hadn't left him. He replayed it in his mind. There had been 10 people at the table. World leaders, tech billionaires, 2 retired generals, and 1 quietly fidgeting little boy who had arrived with Elon Musk. XAA-12, or just X as everyone started calling him, had been remarkably well-behaved for a 5-year-old, seated at a table full of adults speaking in circles. He sat next to Elon, mostly silent, eating only the bread rolls and playing with a napkin folded into an awkward swan. The boy had spoken only once, and that was what Trump couldn't stop thinking about. It happened in the middle of a heated discussion. Elon was explaining a new orbital relay system that would allow satellites to communicate faster, and a prime minister was arguing about cybersecurity risks. The words piled on top of each other, all logic, jargon, and projections. Then, without warning, the boy spoke. What happens when people die? The room went still. Not violently, not even awkwardly, just paused. Every adult looked at the child, then did what adults do. They smiled politely, shifted in their seats, and returned to the conversation as if the question had never been asked. Trump looked down the table at the boy, now staring at his napkin swan, and felt something tug at him. Not the question itself, but the silence that followed it. Now, sitting alone in the quiet of the White House dining room, Trump let out a long breath. He stood slowly, his bones creaking with age and exhaustion, and stepped into the hallway. An aide passed him, murmuring something about a call from South Dakota. Trump waved him off. Not now. He needed air. He moved through the halls with familiarity that only comes from living in a place both revered and feared. He passed portraits, chandeliers, windows that watched centuries go by, and then, almost without thinking, he pushed open the glass doors to the South Garden. The night air was cooler than expected. Fall had started to settle in, soft and certain. He walked slowly along the path toward the old bench beneath the sycamore tree, and that's where he saw him, a small figure curled up alone. Trump stopped. It was X, still in his little blazer from dinner, still holding the same napkin, now wrinkled and limp. The boy was quiet, his red eyes staring at the dark grass as though it held answers. Trump approached slowly. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked gently. X looked up, startled, then shrugged. "I snuck out." Trump gave a soft smile. "I do that sometimes, too." He sat down on the far end of the bench, not too close. X didn't look at him. He was clutching the napkin like a blanket. "You asked a question at dinner," Trump said after a moment. The boy nodded, eyes still down. "And nobody answered." Trump continued. Another nod. "I'm sorry about that," Trump said. "I think you caught us all off guard." X finally looked up at him. "Do grown-ups not like those questions?" X asked softly. Trump tilted his head. "What do you mean by dying?" "And other stuff. People always get quiet, like I did something wrong," the boy added. Trump exhaled slowly. "You didn't do anything wrong." "Then why do they look at me like that?" X asked, his voice small and uncertain. Trump searched for an answer, one that was honest but wouldn't scare the child. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "grown-ups are afraid of questions they don't know how to answer." X frowned. "But they're grown-ups. Aren't they supposed to know?" Trump smiled a sad smile. "We like to think we do, but we're just older, not always wiser." The boy swung his feet a little. "I asked my dad once. He said people go back to the stars, but he said it fast, like he wanted to say something else." Trump nodded slowly. Maybe he didn't know how to say what he really felt. "Do you know what happens when people die?" X asked, looking up at Trump. Trump looked out over the garden, the moonlight gently touching everything. "I've had people I love die. Some suddenly, some slowly. I've stood by their beds. I've said goodbye when I wasn't ready. And you know what I've learned?" Trump turned to the boy. "I don't know what happens next, but I think something does. Something kind. The boy was quiet for a moment, then softly asked, "What if they forget me?" Trump turned his full attention to X. "Who?" "The people who died." "What if they forget I love them?" the boy repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Trump swallowed hard. His own emotions catch him off guard. "I don't think love works that way," he said, his voice thick. "I think when we love someone, really love them, it stays. Even when they go, even if I forget their voice, even then." X remained silent for a long time before whispering, "I don't want to get big if it means I forget things." Trump felt something crack open inside him. He looked at this boy, not just Elon Musk's son, but a child with wonder and sorrow too deep for someone so young. And in that moment, he remembered being that small, that scared, that curious. He remembered asking his mother once, "What happens when we disappear?" She had said, "We don't disappear. We return to the one who made us." He hadn't thought about that in decades. "Do you want to know what I think happens?" Trump asked, his voice soft. X nodded, his eyes wide. Trump pointed upward. "You know, stars die too, right?" "They go boom," X said matter-of-factly. "Exactly," Trump replied. "But do you know what happens after they go boom?" X shook his head, his curiosity growing. "They leave behind light," Trump said. "It keeps traveling, even after the star is gone. It moves through the dark, and sometimes someone sees it years later and says, 'Look how bright that is.'" The boy blinked, processing. "People are like that too," Trump added. "When someone dies, the love they gave, it keeps going like light." X looked up at the sky, then back at Trump. "Do you really believe that?" Trump hesitated. "I think I do now." X smiled faintly, a soft, hopeful expression. The wind rustled through the trees. Trump stood slowly. "Come on," he said, offering his hand. "Let's get you back inside before the Secret Service thinks I've lost a world leader." X giggled, taking his hand, and they walked back to the garden, the soft crunch of leaves beneath their feet. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was full of the unspoken understanding between them. Not all questions have answers, but sometimes asking them together is enough. The next morning, Donald Trump awoke earlier than usual. The sun had barely broken past the horizon, casting a dull amber hue through the tall windows of the residence. The room was silent except for the quiet rustling of the city waking below. He had always been a light sleeper, but today it wasn't noise that stirred him. It was the boy's voice. "Do you really believe that?" Trump sat up slowly, the sheets sliding down his arms. He rubbed his face with both hands and sat still for a while, letting the memory of X's words roll over him. The way the boy had asked about death, the way his tiny fingers clutched that napkin like a lifeline to something familiar, had lodged itself in Trump's chest, like a stone that wouldn't move. He stood and walked a window, staring out over the south lawn. It was calm, neat. Still, everything outside seemed orderly, under control. Everything inside him, however, felt far from it. Trump wasn't a man who embraced discomfort. His instincts were sharp, his habits even sharper. When something made him uneasy, he typically out-talked it or moved quicker than it could catch up with him. But this wasn't something he could escape. Not with meetings, not with cameras, not with applause. He couldn't outrun it. He dressed slowly that morning, in an unusual fashion. There was no television on, no tie, no cufflinks, just a plain navy suit and a pale blue shirt. Open at the collar. In the study downstairs, the coffee was waiting. So was the silence. He sank into the leather chair by the window, sipping slowly, the warmth of the mug doing little to ease the cold running beneath his skin. "I don't want to get big if it means I forget things." Trump didn't know why that sentence hurt more than the others. Maybe it was because, deep down, he remembered saying something similar when he was young. Or maybe it was because he'd only felt it and never dared to voice it. He picked up the phone, considered dialing Elon, but set it back down. What would he even say? "Your son asked about death. He's scared, and he's wondering why you didn't answer." No, that wasn't conversation to have on a Thursday morning. Instead, he opened the drawer beside his desk. Inside was a pile of letters, mostly unopened, notes from supporters, children's drawings, Occasionally a book from a pastor, a handwritten card from a veteran's widow. He picked one at random. It was from a woman in Tennessee, handwritten in neat cursive. Mr. President, please don't forget us little people. We pray for you every night. I hope you know God is still listening. Sometimes I wonder if anyone in Washington still believes in that. He read it twice before setting it down. The boy's question had shaken him, yes, but it wasn't just about death. It was about silence. The kind of silence that adults surround themselves with because they think it shields them from vulnerability. They believe honesty makes them weak. And yet, wasn't it the child who had shown the most strength? He had asked a question that no one else at that table dared to ask. Not with words, at least. Trump leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and saw the boy again, sitting beneath the sycamore tree, his small face glowing in the moonlight. He remembered how the boy had clung to his words, not because they were profound, but because they were spoken gently, truthfully, even when he'd said, "Even if I forget their voice." Trump thought of his older brother, Fred. Fred had died decades ago, a slow, sorrowful descendant of alcohol and regret, a warning Trump had ignored until it was too late. He had grieved, but not fully, not really. For years he had suppressed it. Now, suddenly, the loss hit him again. He remembered Fred's voice and how long it had been since he'd allowed himself to truly hear it. The knock at the door was soft. An aide stepped in. "Sir, Mr. Musk is on the grounds. He's in the Roosevelt room prepping for the energy roundtable." Trump nodded. "Bring him here when he's done." "Just him?" The aide blinked. "Yes, sir." Trump stood and walked slowly to the window once again. He watched the lawn, the reporters setting up outside the gates, the agents standing still like statues. Somewhere, he hoped the boy was out there, playing, asking more questions. An hour later, Elon Musk entered the study. As always, he looked distracted, phone in hand, half-formed thoughts hanging on his face. But when he saw Trump wasn't at his desk, but instead seated near the window, he paused. "You asked to see me?" Trump nodded toward the chair across from him. "Sit." Elon sat down, intrigued. "What's going on?" "Something happened last night." Trump began. Elon raised an eyebrow. "What happened?" "Your son asked a question at dinner." Elon nodded slowly. "About death." "You heard him?" "Of course. I just didn't know how to respond." Trump studied him. "So you said nothing?" Elon shifted, looking uncomfortable for the first time in a while. "What do you say to a 5-year-old who asks what happens when we die?" He wouldn't understand. Trump leaned forward. "He understood that you didn't answer." Elon blinked. "He told me," Trump continued, "that people look at him funny when he asks hard questions, that adults get quiet." Elon shifted again in his seat. "He's always been curious." Trump shook his head. "That's not curiosity. That's loneliness. Silence." Trump exhaled slowly. "Look, I'm not lecturing you. I've made more mistakes with my kids than I can count. I've drowned their silence with my own voice. But last night, I saw a boy trying to understand something he's not supposed to face alone, and no one answered him." Elon now looked genuinely rattled. His usually sharp, distracted eyes were suddenly focused on Trump. "What did you say to him?" Trump stared out the window. "I told him love is like light, that it keeps traveling even after we're gone." Elon looked down at his hands. Trump added, "He listened, and I listened back, and I think that's what he really wanted. Not answers, just someone who wasn't afraid to sit in the not knowing." The room fell quiet. Trump finally looked back at Elon. "We're raising sons in a world we barely understand anymore. They don't need us to be certain. They need us to be present." Elon nodded slowly, quietly. Trump stood. "He's a good boy. Don't let the noise drown him." Elon stood as well. "I won't." Trump nodded once, then turned back to the window. Elon left without another word, and Trump stood there, watching the morning unfold, thinking about all the children who ask big questions, and all the adults who forget that sometimes not knowing is the most honest answer of all. That evening, the White House was quieter than usual. There were no major speeches, no press briefings, just the sound of autumn wind brushing gently against the windows and the muffled footsteps of staff moving through the marble halls. Donald Trump sat alone in the small library, a seldom-used space filled with antique volumes he had never bothered to read. A fire crackled softly in the hearth. He wasn't reading. He was thinking. For most of the day, the memory of X's question had circled in his mind like a hawk over still water. But now, a second thought had begun to stir beneath it, one that had crept in uninvited. When was the last time I asked Barron a real question? Not a casual one, not a polite one, a real one. He had no answer, and it unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He stood slowly, his bones stiff from sitting too long, and made his way upstairs. The residence felt different at night, less official, more like a space where truths could exist without press releases. Outside Barron's room, he paused. The door was cracked open, and a soft light spilled into the hall. He knocked gently. No response. He pushed the door open. Barron was at his desk, headphones in, staring at a tablet screen. Barron looked taller than Trump remembered, more like a young man than a boy. His posture was slouched but focused, and his room was neat, too neat, as if silence had taken up permanent residence there. Trump cleared his throat. Barron looked up, startled, and tugged the headphones down. "Hey," he said, a little wary. "Hey," Trump replied, stepping in. "Didn't mean to sneak up on you." Barron shrugged. "It's fine." Trump glanced around the room. "You're always in here. I like it. It's quiet." Trump nodded, then walked over and sat on the edge of the bed. Barron turned in his chair to watch him. "I met someone yesterday," Trump said. "Elon's son." Barron raised an eyebrow. "X?" "Yeah, he's 5. Asked a question at dinner about death." Barron blinked. "Whoa." Trump nodded. No one answered him. Barron leaned back slightly. "What did you do?" "I found him later, sat with him, told him what I believed, or what I think I believe." Barron didn't speak right away. Trump took a deep breath. "It made me realize something," Trump said. "I don't know if I've ever talked to you about things like that." Barron shrugged. "We don't really talk like that." Trump winced. "No, we don't." They sat in an uncomfortable silence before Trump carefully asked, "Do you ever think about that stuff?" Barron looked away. "Sometimes." "What do you believe?" Barron hesitated. "Thinking. I think people are scared of being forgotten. That's the worst part. Not the dying, just being gone and no one remember what you were like." Trump swallowed hard. "I think I felt that when my brother died," he said quietly. "Fred. He was funny kind. He used to bring me candy after school. And after he was gone, I couldn't remember his laugh for years. I buried it. I think I was scared to hurt." Barron studied him. "I didn't know that," he said. "I've never said it," Trump admitted. They were quiet again for a moment. Then Barron asked, "Do you ever get scared?" Trump gave a faint smile. "Every day." "Of what?" Trump looked out the window. "Of letting people down. Of wasting time. Of talking so much that I forget to hear what matters. Of missing the important stuff because I thought the world was about being right instead of being real." Barron nodded slowly. "That's a lot." "It is," Trump agreed. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the sounds of the house distant and muted. Then Barron spoke again. "I used to have this question, but I stopped asking it." Trump turned his gaze to him. "Why?" "Because I didn't think anyone would want to answer." Trump leaned forward. "Try me." Barron took a breath. "What if I grow up and I'm nothing like you? What if I don't want to do speeches or stand in front of cameras? What if I want a quiet life and I just disappear from all of this?" Trump's chest tightened. He stood, walked over, and placed a hand gently on his son's shoulder. "Then I'll find you," he said softly. "Wherever you go, I'll find you, and I'll listen to whatever you want to say." Barron looked up at him, his eyes filled with emotion. "You promise?" Trump nodded. "I promise." They sat together for a long time, father and son, neither trying to fix anything, just being present in the unspoken space between their truths. Later that night, Trump wrote a short note and placed it in the top drawer of his desk. Sometimes the question is more important than the answer, and the person who dares to ask it is braver than the one who pretends to know. The day after his conversation with Barron, Donald Trump did something he hadn't done in decades. He took a morning off. No cameras, no meetings, no press releases. Just a car waiting outside the West Wing. He didn't tell anyone where he was going, not even his aides. He simply said, "I'll be back by lunch," before stepping into the backseat of a black SUV, leaving behind a stack of unsigned papers and unanswered calls. As the car pulled away, he gave the driver an address he hadn't spoken aloud in years. Queens, his childhood neighborhood. The streets were different now, of course. The diners were gone, the storefronts had changed, and the sidewalks were cleaner, quieter. But the memory of them lingered, buried deep in the bones of the place. And Trump felt it all rising up as they drove deeper into Borough. They stopped in front of a small church, its white siding peeling with age, and a short flight of steps leading up to a weathered red door. He hadn't stepped inside since his mother's funeral. He wasn't even sure if it was still open, but he stepped out of the car, hands tucked into his coat pockets, and slowly walked toward the door. To his surprise, it creaked open softly. Inside, the sanctuary was empty. Dust hung in the air like mist, illuminated by the slanted light streaming through the windows. The wooden pews creaked as he sat near the back. He hadn't come to pray, not exactly, but he needed to be in a place that remembered him. Closing his eyes, he thought of Fred, his mother, and the smallness of his world before it expanded, before the towers, the spotlights, and the microphones, before the weight of it all. He remembered sitting in this very pew as a boy, legs swinging, bored by the sermons but captivated by the stained glass. He remembered whispering questions to his mother as the pastor spoke of heaven. "Where is it?" he had asked. She smiled and touched his hair. "Close, closer than we think." He hadn't understood then, but now, all these years later, he wondered if she had meant that heaven wasn't somewhere far above, but right here, in the small, quiet acts of love, truth, and presence. Like sitting beside a boy who asked about death. Like answering your son when he asks, "What if I don't want to be like you?" He sat there for a long time, until the sound of slow footsteps came from a far corner of the sanctuary. He turned to see an old woman, thin and upright, stepping into the light. "Mr. Trump?" she asked gently. He stood. "You know me?" She smiled. "I was your Sunday school teacher long ago." Her name rushed back to him, Mrs. Carnes. She nodded. "You had a lot of questions back then. Always wanted to know more than we had time for." He chuckled softly. "Still do." She walked down the aisle, her steps slow and careful. "What brings you back?" she asked. He paused, considering. "A little boy asked me, what happens when people die?" She didn't speak immediately, just looked at him with understanding. "I tried to give him an answer," he said, "but it made me realize how much I've stopped asking questions of my own." Mrs. Carnes sat down in the pew across from him. "There's wisdom in answers," she said, "but there's more in the questions we keep asking, even when we're older." He nodded. "I thought I had to know everything," he admitted. "To lead, to protect, to never show doubt." She reached over, placing her wrinkled hand gently on his. "And now," he looked down at her hand on his. "Now, I think maybe the bravest thing I could do is say, I don't know, but I'm here and I'm listening." Mrs. Carnes smiled. "Your mother will be proud of that." Trump swallowed hard, fighting the lump in his throat. They sat in silence for a while, letting the weight of unspoken things settle between them. Eventually, he stood. "I should go. They'll wonder where I am." Mrs. Carnes nodded. "You'll come back?" "I think I will." As he stepped outside, the autumn wind met him like an old friend. He didn't feel younger, but he felt lighter, as though a part of himself had been waiting here all this time. He returned to the White House by noon, as promised. Before doing anything else, he asked Barron if he wanted to take a walk. Just the two of them. They wandered the garden paths slowly, not saying much, until Barron suddenly asked, "You think people go to heaven?" Trump smiled gently. "I don't know," he said, "but I think the love we give gets there, even if we don't." Barron nodded. "I like that." Trump smiled again, feeling the truth of it. That night, he placed a small frame quote on his desk. It was scribbled in pencil, in his own handwriting. "The most important people are the ones who aren't afraid to ask what no one else will." 3 days later, the White House felt unusually quiet. It wasn't because of any external events, no national crisis or breaking news, but because something within Donald Trump had shifted. Though few people noticed at first, those closest to him began to sense it in small ways. He listened more, spoke more slowly, and for the first time in years, he asked questions he didn't try to answer. On the fourth day, Elon Musk returned to Washington for the final round of energy and tech consultations. His son was with him again. Trump saw them in the East Wing corridor. Elon, brisk and sharp as always, and X, a few steps behind, staring up at the chandeliers. "Mr. President," Elon said. Trump smiled. "Elon." He crouched slightly to meet the boy's eyes. "How's my favorite philosopher?" X smiled shyly. "I didn't ask any big questions today." Trump chuckled. "Maybe that's because you're still waiting for an answer." Elon watched their exchange carefully. "I'll be in the Roosevelt room," he said to Trump. "He can stay with you if you like." Trump nodded. "I'd like that." They made their way to the garden. The same bench, the same soft breeze, but now the leaves were a deeper gold, and the silence between them had shifted from awkward to familiar. Trump glanced at X. "You know, you've been on my mind a lot this week." X looked up. "Because I asked that thing." "Exactly that." X played with a leaf in his hands. "Did you find out the answer?" Trump smiled. "Not exactly, but I found something else." "What?" "That asking the question and not running from it is a kind of strength, even when you're little." X nodded thoughtfully. Trump continued. "I talked to my son after we spoke. I told him about you, about how your question helped me remember things I've forgotten." "Like what?" Trump looked up at the sky. "Like how it's okay not to know. Like how love keeps going even when people don't. And how listening, really listening, is sometimes the best answer we can give." X was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm glad I said out loud." Trump nodded. "Me too." X turned to him. "Do you think other grown-ups are scared too?" Trump looked at the boy. "I think most grown-ups are scared, but they hide it. Some behind jobs, some behind anger, some behind being too busy." X looked down. "My daddy's always busy." Trump's voice softened. "So was I for a long time." X asked quietly, "Do you think he loves me?" Trump placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "I know he does. But sometimes love gets buried under all the things adults think they have to do. It doesn't mean it's not there." X's eyes glistened. Trump continued. "You asking that question reminded me that being strong doesn't mean pretending. It means caring enough to be honest, even when it's hard." A quiet passed between them. Then Trump asked, "Can I ask you something now?" X nodded. "What do you think happens when people die?" X thought for a long moment, then said, "I think they go somewhere good, but it's quiet and soft, and no one's a hurry." Trump smiled. "That sounds like heaven to me." The boy leaned against him slightly. "I hope I go there, but not for a long time." Trump looked at him gently. "You will one day, but you've got a lot of living to do first, and a lot of questions left to ask." X smiled. From the edge of the garden, an aide called softly, "Mr. President, Mr. Musk is ready." Trump nodded, then looked at the boy. "Go on," he said. "Your dad's waiting." X stood, but then suddenly turned back and hugged Trump's waist tightly. "Thank you for not being scared." Trump's eyes stung. He placed a hand on the boy's back. "Thank you for being brave enough to ask." The boy ran off. Trump watched him go, the wind lifting leaves around his feet like quiet applause. Later that night, alone in his study, he opened a notebook. Not one filled with strategies or speeches, but just a single page. He wrote, "Sometimes a child's question is the echo of a truth we buried too long ago, and sometimes the answer is not in knowing, but in sitting beside them, unafraid." He closed the book. Outside, the stars had begun to appear, and for the first time in years, Donald Trump sat in their presence, with no need to be anything more than human. If you love this story, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you miss new stories. Show your support by liking the video and sharing with someone you love. Thank you for watching.